If you've ever walked past someone on the street and wondered what their story was, this one is going to stay with you longer than you think. Richard Sinclair had everything. A mansion, 3 luxury cars, a company worth millions. But one rainy Tuesday evening, this man, this powerful man, dropped to his knees on a dirty sidewalk in front of a homeless woman. He was crying. She was holding his face. And the people who saw it couldn't understand what they were seeing. But the truth behind that moment, the truth that had been buried for over 20 years, was about to come out and destroy everything Richard thought he knew about his own life. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York, London, maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. Now let me take you back to where this story really begins. Richard Sinclair was 52 years old. He was a tall man, 6'2", with thick gray hair that he combed straight back every morning without fail. He had deep lines around his eyes, not from laughing, from thinking, from worrying, from spending 30 years building something that looked perfect on the outside, but felt hollow on the inside. His jaw was always tight. His shoulders were always straight. He wore dark suits every single day, even on weekends. Polished black shoes, a silver watch on his left wrist that cost more than most people's cars. He had a habit of rubbing his thumb against the face of that watch when he was thinking. Back and forth. Back and forth. Like he was trying to slow down time or speed it up. He was never quite sure which one. Richard lived in a house so big that his footsteps echoed when he walked down the hallway. It was in Westchester, about 40 minutes north of Manhattan. A stone house with tall windows and a circular driveway. The floors inside were white marble, cold under bare feet. The kitchen had 2 ovens, a 6-burner stove, and a refrigerator the size of a small closet. Every room smelled like vanilla candles and fresh linen because a cleaning crew came in 3 times a week. They dusted shelves that nobody touched. They vacuumed carpets that nobody walked on. They polished countertops where nobody ate. There were paintings on the walls. Abstract ones, the kind that cost a lot of money but don't really mean anything. No family photos anywhere. Not one. No magnets on the fridge. No shoes by the door. The living room had a leather sofa that still looked brand new because nobody ever sat on it. In the corner, a grandfather clock ticked away the hours, and that was often the only sound in the entire house. Tick. 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 Like the house itself was counting down to something. Richard ran a real estate development company called Sinclair Properties. He had built it from nothing. Started with one small apartment building in Brooklyn when he was 29. Now he owned shopping centers, office towers, and apartment complexes across 3 states. He had over 200 employees. He sat at the head of every meeting. He reviewed every contract. He signed every deal. People respected him. Some feared him. His business partners said he was fair but hard. His employees said he paid well but never smiled. He was the kind of man who shook your hand and made you feel like you were being measured, and most people came up short. Now you might be wondering, with all that money, with all that success, why did Richard seem so empty? Let me tell you. He had been married once, to a woman named Gloria. They met when Richard was 28 and Gloria was 25. She was a nurse at a children's hospital downtown. She had warm brown skin, bright eyes that curved when she smiled, and a laugh that could fill a room. The kind of laugh that made strangers on the subway smile without knowing why. She wore her hair in braids most days, and she always carried a small bottle of hand lotion in her purse because the hospital soap dried out her skin. Richard used to hold her hands at night and rub lotion into them while they watched television. He never told anyone he did that. It was just theirs. They got married when Richard was 30. Small wedding. Gloria's mother cried. Richard's sister Diane gave a toast. The cake was chocolate, Gloria's favorite. Richard didn't care about cake, but he ate 3 slices that night because every time he took a bite, Gloria would laugh and say, "See, I told you chocolate was better." For the first 2 years it was good. Not perfect, but good. The apartment was small. They argued about dishes and laundry and whose turn it was to take out the trash. Normal things. Happy things. Gloria would come home from the hospital smelling like hand sanitizer and baby powder, and Richard loved that smell. He loved it because it meant she was close. She would kick off her shoes at the door, always her shoes, right in the middle of the doorway, and Richard would trip over them and pretend to be annoyed. But he never moved them, not once. But then the business started growing. Richard got his first big contract, then his second, then his third. And slowly, without either of them noticing at first, the gap between them started to grow. Gloria wanted children. Richard said not yet. Gloria wanted dinners at home. Richard worked until midnight. Gloria wanted to talk about her day, about the baby in room 4 who finally went home, about the mother who cried in the hallway, about the doctor who made a mistake and nobody wanted to talk about it. Richard wanted silence. He wanted to sit with his spreadsheets and his blueprints and his plans. He said he was building something. Gloria said he was building a wall. Year by year, the crack got wider. Like a crack in a wall that nobody fixes. You see it. You know it's there, but you tell yourself it's small enough to ignore. Until one day, the whole wall breaks. They divorced after 6 years. Gloria signed the papers at a diner on Flatbush Avenue. She was wearing a yellow dress. Richard was wearing a suit. She didn't cry. He didn't either. They just sat there, across from each other, with 2 cups of coffee getting cold between them. And then Gloria stood up, picked up her bag and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Richard." And she walked out. Richard buried himself in work. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he was better off alone. And for 20 years he believed it. For 20 long years he woke up in that big, empty house, drove to his office, worked until dark, came home, and did it all again. No friends, no partner, no family dinners. Just the sound of that grandfather clock. Tick, tick, tick. But what Richard didn't know, what nobody had ever told him, was that Gloria had been pregnant when she left. She found out 2 weeks before the divorce was final. 2 weeks. She sat alone in a bathroom, looking at a test with 2 pink lines, and she made a choice. She chose not to tell him. She was angry. She was hurt. She thought he didn't want a family, so she decided to build one without him. She packed a suitcase, got on a bus to Philadelphia, and never looked back. Now, Richard had a younger sister named Diane. Diane was 47, sharp-faced, always well-dressed, always in control. She had straight black hair that she wore in a tight bun, and she had a way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. She managed the financial side of Sinclair Properties and had been by Richard's side since the very beginning. She knew every number, every deal, every client. People in the office called her the gatekeeper because nothing got to Richard without going through Diane first. Most people thought she was loyal. Most people thought she was looking out for her brother. But Diane had a secret she had been keeping for over 15 years. A secret that had shaped Richard's entire life without him knowing. And then there was Marcus. Marcus Williams was Richard's driver, a quiet man, 55 years old, with rough hands and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been driving Richard for 11 years. He knew when Richard was angry by how he breathed, short, through his nose. He knew when Richard was sad by how long he stared out the car window without blinking. Marcus had 3 grown children of his own and a wife named Loretta, who made the best sweet potato pie in the state of New Jersey. He never talked about his family at work, because he could tell it made Richard uncomfortable. He never pushed. He just drove. He opened doors. He waited. And sometimes, when the car was quiet and the city lights were blurring past the windows, he would look in the rearview mirror and think, that man has everything. And nothing. But what happened next changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in October. The rain had started around 4 in the afternoon and hadn't stopped. Not a light rain. A heavy, angry rain that made the streets shine like glass and turned every gutter into a small river. Richard was sitting in the back of his black car, Marcus driving, heading home from a meeting downtown. Traffic was crawling. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth. Richard was looking at his phone, scrolling through emails, not really reading any of them. His thumb was rubbing the face of his watch, back and forth, back and forth. Then the car stopped at a red light on the corner of Madison and 43rd. That's when Richard looked up, and what he saw made his whole body go still. There was a woman sitting on the sidewalk, right next to a bus stop bench. She wasn't on the bench, she was on the ground, on the wet concrete, with her back against a brick wall. She looked like she was in her late 40s or maybe early 50s, but it was hard to tell. She had a torn gray blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her clothes were old and layered, a thin jacket over a sweater over something else. Her hair was matted and soaked. She was holding a cardboard sign, but the rain had turned the ink into a dark blur. You couldn't read a word of it. Her shoes were falling apart. One had no lace. She was shaking. Not from cold, not exactly. It was deeper than cold. It was the kind of shaking that comes when your body has been tired for so long that it doesn't remember what rest feels like. But that wasn't what made Richard freeze. It was her face. Even through the rain, even through the dirt and the years and the pain, he recognized something. He wasn't sure at first. He blinked. He leaned forward. His hand pressed flat against the glass of the car window, leaving a print. And then his chest tightened so hard he felt like he was drowning on dry land. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. "Stop the car," he whispered. Marcus looked in the rearview mirror. "Sir, we're in traffic. Stop the car, right now, pull over." Marcus pulled to the curb. Richard opened the door before the car had fully stopped. The rain hit him immediately, soaking through his suit jacket, running down his collar, flattening his gray hair against his head. He didn't care. He stepped onto the sidewalk and walked toward the woman like a man walking toward something he was afraid might disappear. His legs were unsteady. His hands were trembling at his sides. People with umbrellas stepped out of his way without knowing why. A man in a soaked suit, walking through the rain with no umbrella, looking like he had just seen a ghost. The woman looked up. Her eyes were dull, empty. The eyes of someone who had stopped expecting anything from the world a long time ago. She didn't recognize him. She just looked at him, the way people on the street look at strangers who come too close, with a mix of fear and small, stubborn hope. "Gloria?" Richard said. His voice cracked on her name like glass hitting stone. The woman blinked. Her cracked lips parted. And then, slowly, like a candle being lit in a room that had been dark for years, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Memory. Pain. "Richard?" she whispered. Her voice was so thin he almost didn't hear it over the rain. He dropped to his knees, right there on the wet sidewalk, in his $3,000 suit, in the pouring rain, in front of passing cars and strangers and the whole world. His knees hit the concrete, and he felt the cold water soak through his pants, but he didn't care. The rain was running down his face and mixing with tears he didn't even know had started. He reached for her hands and held them. They were so thin, so cold. The skin was rough and cracked. The knuckles were swollen, the nails were broken, and there were calluses where there used to be softness. These were not the hands he remembered, the soft hands that held his face on their wedding night, the hands that smelled like baby powder and hand lotion, the hands that used to rest on his arm during movies when she was falling asleep. These hands had suffered in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. They had begged. They had reached out for help and been turned away. They had held a screaming child while strangers put that child in a car. And he felt something break inside him, something deep and old and fundamental, something he didn't even know was still whole. "How?" he said. One word. That's all he could get out. Gloria didn't answer. She just started crying. And Richard, this man who owned buildings and signed million-dollar checks and hadn't cried in 20 years, he cried too. On his knees, in the rain, holding the hands of the woman he had lost. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Richard brought Gloria to the car. Marcus came around and opened the door without a word. He didn't ask questions. 11 years of driving, Richard had taught him when to speak and when to stay quiet. This was a time to stay quiet. Gloria sat in the back seat wrapped in Richard's suit jacket. She was still shaking. She smelled like rain and old fabric, and something sad that has no name. The smell of a life that has been stripped down to nothing. Richard sat next to her. He didn't speak. He just kept looking at her hands in her lap. Those hands. When they got to the house in Westchester, Richard brought her inside. Her wet shoes squeaked on the marble floor. She looked around the big, empty house, the tall ceilings, the paintings, the cold, white surfaces, and she looked like she didn't belong. But Richard pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, sat her down under the warm yellow light and said, "You're safe here. You're safe." He gave her clean clothes from his closet, an old gray sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants with a drawstring that she had to pull tight. He made her tea, Earl Grey. He remembered that she used to drink Earl Grey. He set the mug in front of her and sat down across the table and waited. "Gloria," he said softly, "please, tell me what happened." She wrapped both hands around the mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world. She stared down at the tea for a long time. Then she started talking. After the divorce, she had moved to Philadelphia. She was 5 weeks pregnant, and she didn't tell Richard because she was angry. She was hurt. She thought he didn't want a family, so she decided to build one without him. She rented a small apartment in a neighborhood with a laundromat on the corner and a church across the street. She got a nursing job at a clinic. And she had a baby girl. She named her Maya. Maya Rose. For the first few years, things were tight, but okay. Gloria worked long shifts. A neighbor named Mrs. Patterson watched Maya during the day. Maya was a quiet child. Big, dark eyes, skinny legs, always drawing. She drew on everything. Napkins, grocery bags, the backs of her homework sheets. She drew houses and trees and people with big smiles. She drew pictures of a man she had never met, because Gloria would describe Richard to her at bedtime. She would say, "Your daddy is tall. He has gray in his hair even though he's not that old. He rubs his watch when he's thinking." And Maya would draw him. A tall man with gray hair and a watch. But then Gloria got sick. It started slowly. So slowly she almost didn't notice. Headaches that wouldn't go away. The kind that sat behind her eyes like a weight. Dizziness when she stood up too fast. Forgetting small things, where she put her keys, whether she had locked the door, what she had eaten for breakfast. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was exhaustion. She told herself she just needed rest. But it wasn't rest she needed. It was a doctor. Then one afternoon at the clinic, she collapsed in the middle of checking a patient's blood pressure. She hit the floor hard, woke up in a hospital bed with wires on her chest and bright lights above her, and a doctor standing at the foot of the bed who was not smiling. The diagnosis was a degenerative brain condition, something that affected her memory, her balance, her ability to concentrate. She couldn't work. She lost her nursing license. She lost her job. Then she couldn't pay rent. She lost the apartment. She and Maya moved to a shelter, then to a friend's couch, then to another shelter. Piece by piece, like sand slipping through her fingers, everything fell away. And here's the part that made Richard's blood go cold. During those years, Gloria had tried to reach him. She called the old office number. A receptionist said Mr. Sinclair's number had changed and transferred her to Diane. Gloria called Diane. She told her everything. About Maya, about the illness, about losing the apartment. She begged Diane to please just tell Richard. Just let him know he had a daughter. Just give him the chance to help. Diane said she would take care of it. But she never did. Diane never told Richard a single word. Not about Gloria, not about Maya, not about any of it. She buried the truth like a stone at the bottom of a river. And for 15 years, she kept it buried. Richard sat at that kitchen table and felt the whole room spin around him. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The tick of the grandfather clock in the next room sounded like a hammer hitting a nail. "She knew?" Richard said. His voice was quiet, but his whole body was shaking. "Diane knew about Maya? About you? About all of it?" Gloria nodded slowly. She told me you didn't want to hear it. She said you had moved on. She said if I contacted you directly, she would make sure I lost custody of Maya. Richard couldn't speak. He pushed his chair back. He stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the rain was still falling, running down the glass in thin lines. And inside, something in Richard was falling too. Falling apart, piece by piece, like a building with no foundation. But the real shock was still coming. "Gloria," Richard said, his back still to her. "Where is Maya now?" Silence. A terrible silence, the kind that answers the question before the words do. Gloria's face crumbled. Her chin dropped. Her shoulders caved in like she was trying to make herself smaller. "I lost her, Richard. When I couldn't take care of myself anymore, when I could barely remember what day it was, social services came. They said I was unfit. Maya was 9 years old. They took her. I screamed. She screamed. They put her in a car and drove away, and I never saw her again." She was crying now, hard. The kind of crying that doesn't make much sound because the pain is too deep for noise. Richard closed his eyes. 9 years old. His daughter had been 9 years old when they took her. She was out there somewhere, in the system, in the world, and he didn't know if she was safe. He didn't know if she was alive. He had missed everything. Her first word, her first day of school, the drawing she made of a tall man with a watch. All of it. Gone. Richard picked up his phone. He called Marcus, who was waiting in the kitchen doorway. "I need you to help me find someone," Richard said. "I'll explain everything, but I need your help, and I need it now." Marcus nodded. "Whatever you need, sir." Then Richard made another call. He dialed Diane's number. If you think that was bad, wait until you hear what Diane did next. Richard stood in the kitchen for a full minute before he picked up the phone. Gloria was still at the table, both hands around her tea, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like a woman who had been carrying a boulder up a hill for 15 years and had finally been allowed to set it down. Richard looked at her and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Rage. Not the hot, loud kind that makes you throw things. The cold kind. The kind that settles into your chest like ice and doesn't melt. The kind that makes your voice go quiet instead of loud. He dialed Diane's number. Gloria watched him. She didn't try to stop him. She just wrapped the sweatshirt tighter around her thin shoulders and waited. The phone rang 3 times. Diane answered in her usual cool, measured voice. "Richard, it's almost 10. What is it?" Richard didn't raise his voice, and that is what made it so dangerous. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like every word was a nail being driven into wood. "Gloria is here. She's sitting in my kitchen right now. She's been living on the street, Diane, homeless, sleeping on concrete. And she told me something very interesting tonight. She told me that 15 years ago, she called you and told you that I had a daughter named Maya. She asked you to tell me. So here is my question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Is that true?" Silence. Long silence. The kind of silence that tells you everything you need to know before a single word is spoken. "Richard, listen to me. Is it true? You don't understand the situation. It was complicated. Is it true?" Another silence. Then Diane's voice changed. The professional smoothness fell away, and what was underneath was something cold and hard and ugly. "Yes," she said, "it's true. And honestly, I would do it again." Richard felt the floor tilt under his feet. He gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "Why?" "Because you would have gone soft, Richard. If you had known about that child, you would have dropped everything. You would have gone running back to Gloria and her little baby girl, and everything we built, everything I spent my life helping you build, would have crumbled. The deals, the buildings, the company. You needed to be focused. You needed to be sharp. And a man with a baby is not sharp. So I made a decision. I protected the business. I protected us." Richard was quiet for so long that Diane said, "Richard, are you still there?" "You didn't protect us," Richard said. "You stole my daughter from me. You let Gloria get sick and lose everything. You let a little girl grow up without a father, and you did it for money, for buildings, for a company. I did it for the family, Diane said. You are not my family, Richard said. Not anymore. He hung up the phone. He set it down on the counter. And he stood there in the quiet kitchen with his hands flat on the cold marble, and he felt 20 years of lies sitting on his chest like a stone. But the biggest secret hadn't come out yet. The next morning, Richard hired a private investigator named Charles Webb. He gave him everything Gloria could remember: the last address in Philadelphia, the name of the social worker, the year Maya was taken, her birthday, her middle name. Webb said these cases take time, sometimes months, sometimes longer. Richard said, I don't care how long it takes. Find my daughter. 3 days later, Marcus came to Richard's office with a folder. He set it on the desk and said, I did some looking on my own, sir. You need to see this. Marcus had made some calls, talked to people he knew, and what he had found made the whole situation even worse. Diane hadn't just ignored Gloria's phone call. She had actively, deliberately, systematically blocked Gloria from reaching Richard for years. She had changed Richard's personal cell phone number and told him it was a carrier issue. She had intercepted 2 handwritten letters that Gloria mailed to the office. And 7 years ago, when Gloria had shown up at the lobby of Sinclair Properties, sick, barely able to stand, wearing a coat with a broken zipper, Diane had called building security. She had them walk Gloria out the front door. And she told Gloria that if she ever came back, she would have her arrested for trespassing. Marcus had found the security camera footage from that day. It was grainy, but clear enough. Gloria, thin and shaking, standing in the bright lobby. And Diane, arms crossed, standing over her, pointing at the door. Not angry, not upset, just cold, like she was taking out the trash. Richard watched the footage 3 times without saying a word. His face didn't change, but his hands were gripping the arms of his chair so hard the leather creaked. Then he said, Call a board meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. And just when Diane thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. The board meeting was at 9 sharp, the conference room on the 22nd floor. Long glass table, 12 leather chairs, a view of the city that made people feel important. Diane walked in at 8:55, wearing her usual black blazer, her hair in its tight bun, her usual confident smile. She sat down, opened her folder, clicked her pen. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Richard stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit down. He looked at every person in the room: 6 board members, 2 company lawyers, Marcus standing quietly by the door, and Diane. I'm going to tell you all a story this morning, Richard said. And when I'm finished, I'm going to make a decision. He told them everything. About Gloria, about Maya, about the phone calls Diane intercepted, about the letters she destroyed, about the day she had security throw a sick, homeless woman out of the building. He played the security footage on the screen behind him. The room was silent. One of the board members put her hand over her mouth. The lawyer on the left stopped writing. Richard pointed at the screen. This woman is the mother of my child. She came to this building 7 years ago asking for help, and this woman, he turned and pointed at Diane, had her thrown out, like she was nothing. Diane's face had gone completely white. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I'm removing you from the company, Richard said. Effective immediately. Your shares will be bought out at fair market value. You will have no further role in Sinclair Properties. Your key card will be deactivated today. And if I find out that you did anything else, anything at all, that hurt Gloria or my daughter, I will not stop at business. I will go to court. Diane stood up. Her chair rolled back and hit the wall. Her hands were shaking. You can't do this to me. I am your sister. I gave my life to this company. Richard looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, and then he said the words that everyone in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. Being family does not give you the right to destroy someone else's life. You had power, and you used it to keep a mother from her child and a father from his daughter. That is not protection. That is not loyalty. That is cruelty. And cruelty does not get a seat at this table. The room was silent. You could hear the ventilation system humming. You could hear someone's pen drop. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia, who had been with the company for 8 years, had tears running down her face. She wasn't wiping them. Diane stood there for a moment, her mouth open, her eyes wide, looking around the room for someone, anyone, who would defend her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Not one person in that room said a word on her behalf. She picked up her folder. She clicked her pen closed.
She pushed her chair in, slowly, carefully, like she was trying to hold on to some kind of dignity that was already gone. Then she turned and walked out. Her heels clicked on the floor. The glass door swung shut behind her, and nobody in that room stopped her. Richard stood at the head of the table for a long moment after she left. Then he said, "Thank you all for your time. Let's get back to work." And he sat down and opened the next file on the agenda. Because that is what Richard Sinclair did. He kept building, even when everything around him was breaking. Stay with us, because what comes next will change everything. The days that followed were hard. Richard barely slept. He would lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, listening to the grandfather clock, thinking about a 9-year-old girl being put into a car while her mother screamed. He would close his eyes and try to imagine what Maya looked like now. He couldn't. He had no picture, no reference. Just Gloria's description. "She has your jaw, Richard," and his own imagination, which kept giving him images he couldn't bear. 2 weeks later, the private investigator called. He had found Maya. She was 21 years old. She was living in Baltimore, Maryland. She had aged out of the foster care system at 18 and had been on her own ever since. She had no college degree, no family, no support. But she had survived. She had found a job at a small bookstore near the harbor, a quiet little place called Chapter and Verse, with wooden shelves and soft lamplight and the smell of old paper and coffee. She had a studio apartment 6 blocks away with a window that looked out at the water. And she had a shelf full of books that she had read more than once, because books were the one thing in her life that never left. Richard drove to Baltimore himself. He didn't send Marcus. He didn't send the investigator. He went alone. He drove the whole way with the radio off, 3 hours of silence and highway and his own heartbeat. He found the bookstore on a narrow street near the waterfront. It was a small place, tucked between a bakery and a tailor. A handwritten sign in the window said, "Open." A bell rang when he pushed the door. And there she was. Maya was standing behind the counter, sorting a stack of paperbacks. She was tall. She had his height. She had Gloria's eyes, dark brown and deep, the kind of eyes that see more than they say. She had her mother's skin and her father's jaw. She was wearing a green sweater with the sleeves pushed up past her elbows, and her hair was in a thick braid that hung over one shoulder. She looked up when the bell rang and smiled, a polite bookstore smile, and said, "Can I help you find something?" Richard's throat closed. His eyes burned. He had practiced what he was going to say 100 times on the drive down. He had rehearsed it out loud in the car. But now, standing 5 feet away from his daughter for the first time in his life, every word disappeared. "Are you Maya?" he managed. Her smile faded slightly. She tilted her head. "Yes. Do I know you?" "My name is Richard Sinclair," he said. His voice was shaking. "And I know, that I am your father." Maya didn't move. She didn't speak. She stood perfectly still behind the counter, holding a paperback against her chest like a shield. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain outside and the soft creak of the old wooden floor. Then her chin started to tremble. Not because she was happy, not because she was angry, but because she had spent 21 years waiting to hear those words. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped believing they would ever come. "I didn't know," Richard said. His voice broke in the middle. "I swear to you, Maya, I didn't know you existed. Your mother tried to tell me. Someone kept it from me. And I am so sorry." "I am so sorry that I wasn't there." Maya set the book down slowly. She came out from behind the counter. She walked toward him and stopped about 2 feet away.
She was shaking. He was shaking. Two strangers who shared the same blood, standing in a bookstore in the rain, trying to figure out what to do with 21 years of silence. Then she said something so simple that it nearly brought Richard to the floor. "I used to draw pictures of you," she said quietly. "Mom would describe you to me at bedtime. She said you were tall, and you had gray in your hair, and you rubbed your watch when you were thinking. And I would draw you, over and over. In foster care, I kept one drawing in my backpack. I carried it with me everywhere. I just wanted to know what my dad looked like." Richard's knees buckled. He pulled her close and held her. He held her like he was trying to make up for every birthday, and every school play, and every scraped knee, and every nightmare he wasn't there for. And she held him back. She gripped the back of his shirt with both hands and pressed her face into his shoulder. And they stood there in that little bookstore, between the shelves and the old paper and the soft light, and they cried like two people who had finally found the piece of themselves that had been missing. What Maya was about to discover would change everything she believed about her life. Richard brought Maya back to New York. He drove slowly. They talked the whole way. 3 hours of highway and bridges and traffic, and they filled every minute. Maya told him about foster care. 4 different homes in 9 years. The first family was nice, an older couple in Trenton who had 3 other foster kids. They kept the house clean and made dinner every night and helped with homework. But then the husband got sick and they couldn't take care of the kids anymore. Maya was moved. The second home was in Camden. It was crowded. 6 kids in a 3-bedroom house. Maya slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. She learned to eat fast because food went quickly. She learned to keep her things in her backpack because anything left out got taken or broken. She kept her drawing of Richard, the tall man with gray hair and a watch, folded inside a library book. That was the one thing nobody ever touched. The third home was the bad one. Maya didn't go into details. She said the word bad and then went quiet for a full minute, staring out the car window at the passing trees. Richard didn't push. He gripped the steering wheel and kept his eyes on the road and swallowed the rage that rose in his throat like a fist. The fourth home was the last, a single woman named Ms. Carolyn who lived in Baltimore. She was strict but fair. She made Maya do chores and finish school. She didn't hug much, but she showed up to every parent-teacher conference and made sure Maya had clean clothes and new shoes at the start of every school year. When Maya aged out at 18, Miss Carolyn gave her an envelope with $400 inside and said, "You're smart. Don't let anyone tell you different." That was the nicest thing any adult had ever said to her. Maya told Richard about finding the bookstore job, about teaching herself to cook rice and beans from a YouTube video because nobody had ever taught her. She told him she liked rainy days because the bookstore was quieter and she could read between customers. She told him she had read every book on the bottom 2 shelves twice. Richard told her about the company, about the big empty house, about the grandfather clock that was the loudest thing in his life for 20 years. He told her about her mother's yellow dress on the day they signed the divorce papers. He told her about the hand lotion. When they pulled into the driveway in Westchester, Maya looked at the house and went quiet. Then she looked at Richard and said, "You lived here alone? All this time?" "Yes," he said. She shook her head. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." They walked inside, and when Maya stepped through the front door and saw Gloria standing in the hallway, her mother, clean, rested, wearing a soft blue sweater, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, Maya stopped breathing. "Mama?" she whispered. Gloria set down the tea. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her whole body started shaking. "My baby," she said. "Oh God, my baby girl." Maya ran. She ran across the marble floor in her old sneakers and threw her arms around her mother, and they both went down. Right there on the floor of that big, empty house, holding each other, rocking back and forth, crying so hard that the sound filled every room. Richard stood in the doorway. Marcus stood behind him, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Nobody spoke. Some moments don't need words. They just need time. Over the next few months, things changed in that house. Changed in ways Richard never expected and never could have planned. Gloria moved in.
Richard hired a full-time nurse named Janet to help manage her condition. The dizziness, the memory lapses, the bad days when she couldn't remember what year it was. Janet was a large woman with gentle hands and a deep laugh, and she and Gloria became friends within a week. Richard set up a trust fund for Maya and told her she could go to college whenever she was ready, study whatever she wanted. Maya said she would think about it. She wasn't ready to leave Baltimore yet. The bookstore was hers now, her safe place, her anchor. But she came to New York every other weekend, and every time she walked through the front door, the house felt less empty. The house itself started to change. There were shoes by the door now. Gloria's shoes. She still kicked them off in the doorway just like she used to, and Richard still tripped over them. But this time, he smiled. There were flowers on the kitchen table, bright ones, sunflowers and daisies, because Gloria said expensive flowers were a waste. There were drawings on the fridge. Maya had started drawing again, small sketches on index cards that she would leave behind when she went back to Baltimore. A bird, a coffee cup, the view from the kitchen window. And the smell of the house changed. It didn't smell like vanilla candles and cleaning products anymore. It smelled like eggs frying in a pan, like toast burning because Gloria always forgot the timer, like coffee at 7 in the morning, like a home. Richard cut his work hours in half. He started coming home before dark. He and Gloria didn't get back together, not like that. Too much time had passed, too much pain between them. But they became something. Friends. Partners. Family. Two people who had lost 20 years and were trying to find some of them again, one small moment at a time. One Sunday afternoon in December, Maya was sitting at the kitchen table drawing. She had her colored pencils spread out across the table, the nice ones Richard had bought her, the ones that came in a wooden box with 64 colors. She was sketching the backyard, the bare trees, the gray sky, the wooden fence with the missing slat. Gloria was asleep in the next room. Janet was reading a book by the window. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the old kind of quiet. It was the good kind, the kind that means everyone is safe. Richard sat down across from Maya with a cup of coffee. He watched her draw for a while. Her hand moved in smooth, confident strokes. She had Gloria's patience and Richard's focus. He could see both of them in her, and it hit him every time like something new. "That's beautiful," he said. Maya smiled without looking up. "Mom always said I got my hands from you." Richard looked down at his own hands. Big, rough, the hands of a man who built things. Then he looked at Maya's. Long fingers, steady lines, gentle pressure. He couldn't see the similarity, but somehow he felt it. "Maya," he said quietly, "I know I missed everything. Your first steps, your first words, your first day of school, all those years. I know I can't get them back. But I want you to know something. Every day I have with you now, every single day, I'm grateful for. Every one." Maya put down her pencil. She looked up at him. And then she said something so simple and so true that Richard would carry it with him for the rest of his life. "You didn't miss everything, Dad. You're here now. And that's the part I'm going to remember." Richard reached across the table and held her hand. And outside the kitchen window, for the first time in what felt like weeks, the sun came through the clouds and lit up the backyard like gold. That evening, Marcus was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, something he had started doing on his own, without anyone asking, because that was the kind of man Marcus was. Gloria walked in and stood beside him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Marcus, for helping him find her, for everything you did." Marcus dried his hands on a dish towel. "That's what family does, ma'am." Gloria looked at him. "You are family, Marcus. Don't you ever forget that." Marcus smiled. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. And he nodded once and went back to the dishes. 3 months later, Richard donated a large sum of money to a women's shelter downtown. He didn't put his name on the building.
He put Gloria's. The sign above the front door read, "The Gloria Sinclair House, because everyone deserves a second chance." Inside, there were clean beds and warm meals, and a small room in the back with bookshelves and colored pencils and paper, where children could sit and draw while their mothers figured out the next step. And every Tuesday evening, rain or shine, busy or not, Richard drove downtown to that shelter himself. He didn't send a check. He didn't send an assistant.
He went in person. He sat with the women in the common room. He listened to their stories. He didn't give advice. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. Because he had learned that sometimes listening is the most powerful thing you can do. Sometimes just showing up and sitting down and saying, "I'm here," is enough. Sometimes it's everything. Maya came with him once. She sat in the children's room at the shelter and drew with the kids. A little girl, about 5 years old, with 2 missing front teeth and pink barrettes in her hair, sat next to Maya and watched her draw a cat. The little girl said, "Can you teach me?" Maya said, "Of course." She put the pencil in the little girl's hand and guided it across the paper. When the cat was done, lopsided, with one ear bigger than the other, the little girl held it up and grinned and said, "I'm going to show my mom." Maya watched her run out of the room, and she sat there for a moment, holding a colored pencil, remembering what it felt like to be small and scared and desperate for someone to show you how. And occasionally, when the evening was over and the shelter was quiet, Richard would step outside onto the sidewalk and look up at the sky and think about that rainy Tuesday night when he found Gloria on the ground. He would think about how close he came to driving right past her, how if the light had been green instead of red, he would have kept going, and his daughter would still be a stranger, and his life would still be a beautiful, empty box. Because that is the thing Richard Sinclair finally learned. You can build an empire with your hands. You can fill a house with expensive things. You can have your name on buildings and your picture in newspapers. But if there is no one inside that house who loves you, if there is no one at the table, no one humming in the kitchen, no one kicking off their shoes in the doorway, no one leaving little drawings on the fridge, then everything you built means nothing. It is just walls and silence and a clock ticking in an empty room. The only thing that fills a home is the thing you cannot buy. And sometimes, the only way to find it is to get down on your knees in the rain and reach out your hand. And that's where we'll leave this story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from this? See you next time.